What's up, guys? My name's Thomas, and I used to teach Russian to American military linguists. But what a lot of people don't know is I actually learned the language when I was in my early 20s. First started studying it and getting serious about it when I was about 23. And I eventually ended up being recruited, and I was one of the few non-native speakers to teach at the institute where I was working. And that's a whole other story, how I wound up in that position and eventually became a professor. If you watch a lot of my content, I talk about filmmaking, movies, and kind of a lot of general self-development topics. But I figured I would be remiss if I were to not talk about the benefits and everything that language learning did for my life and how it changed my life as a whole. So right now we're going to get into the 5 life-changing benefits of learning a foreign language. First and foremost, your confidence is going to go through the roof thanks to all of the vulnerability and exposure that you put yourself through when trying to learn a new language. You're putting yourself on the line day in and day out, and it's embarrassing. A lot of the moments, when you feel like you're making a fool out of yourself, you're really just learning, and you get used to being uncomfortable. You get comfortable being uncomfortable, basically. And you're ultimately going to encounter a lot of challenges, both cognitively, emotionally, and socially while you're trying to learn another language, that as you overcome those challenges, you really start to become more confident. And of course, the skill sets are nice, but here we're talking about things outside of just knowing the language itself, and confidence is easily one of those. The second life-changing benefit is improved communication skills overall. And when you're struggling to communicate with somebody else in a foreign language, you really start to pick up more on all of those nonverbal cues, and especially when there are multiple people around, you start picking up on all of these different elements of communication to where, because you're dependent on those. And it's to the point where when you go back into your native language, which is probably English, if you're watching this, everything just becomes so much better, more fun, and a lot easier to communicate with people. I'll give you an example, kind of an analogy of how this works. When I first got my motorcycle license and I started riding around a lot, you start to pay attention to everything on the road because there's a lot more at stake, and you have to be safe. You have to be actively scanning for threats. Not that talking to somebody, you're always looking for threats, but the point I'm getting at is that you start to notice so many things when you're riding a motorcycle that when you go back to driving a car, you are a much better driver because you have so much better situational awareness. You're looking at conditions on the road. You're more cognizant of what other people are doing in their cars, what's happening at intersections and stuff. And so it just makes you a better driver overall. And that's the same with communication. If you get so used to struggling in a foreign language, even if it's just the basic skills we're talking about here, when you go back into your native language, it's so much, you start to pick up so many more things that you really kind of improve on your communication skills. The third life-changing benefit of learning a foreign language is cultural competency. Now, I'm not just talking about the culture of your target language. It's no secret that you will become more proficient in the culture of the target language that you're studying. However, I'm talking about how culture functions in life overall, in all areas of life. And it's really kind of a fascinating thing. I'm currently reading a book called For the Culture by Marcus Collins. And it's a really interesting book. It has to do with marketing and basically how people behave in the marketplace. So there's just an example of how culture functions in everyday life and how it affects business and human behavior, social interactions, even within one particular language. In my last job, I not only had to be proficient in Russian culture and how it related or contrasted with American culture, but also civilian culture and military culture, because I was teaching service members, but working alongside other civilians as a civilian. Most of them were native Russian speakers, so they weren't originally from the US. And so you really have to take into consideration and appreciate how influential culture can be in so many different areas. Life-changing benefit number 4, improved global awareness. One of the things I love about being able to understand Russian right now is everything that's going on in the world. I can check multiple news sources and social media content, and it happens to be a lot different than, you know, what we're hearing in the States, and depending on the source that you're listening to. And that goes back to even watching a foreign film with subtitles or that's dubbed. Any kind of translation or interpretation is just that. It's from another human being. So, and a lot of it is very subjective. And you don't just take translations or, you know, news sources at first glance. You kind of take everything with a grain of salt, because you know that there might be some kind of motivation behind the way it was interpreted or translated, and you really start to appreciate that a lot of these translations are flawed, and it depends on the source. So that is a benefit that you will always appreciate when you learn a foreign language, is not just current events, but global events at all times, and checking those different sources. The 5th life-changing benefit of learning a foreign language is the realization that while your new language skills are perishable, they can only improve with time. And it doesn't matter how old you are. And by the way, as far as age goes, let me just dispel that myth for you right there. You know, people who think that you can be too old to learn a language, it's not true. You can use age and experience to your advantage. And I can tell you right now, language learning in particular right now happens to be much more accessible to everybody. It's definitely cheaper. That's not to say that it is harder or easier than, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago, but it is more accessible. And in another video, we can talk about specifically how to go about learning a foreign language. You know, at the very least, how I did it. Some things that I would do differently if I was just starting out now. It's something that you can always improve on. It's going to be with you for life. And it's a very tangible skill. Nobody can ever take away from you. If you learn a foreign language, you become proficient to a certain level. That's something you'll have forever. That's it for today, guys. I want to go more in depth with each of these life-changing benefits, because it truly has changed my life. Being able to speak Russian and all the different benefits that I've had from, you know, not just professionally and getting to travel and stuff like that, but really just becoming more aware of my surroundings and myself. You learn a lot about yourself, and it's a really life-changing experience. I'll just call it that. It's life-changing. So hope you guys have a good week, and till next time, guys.